Welcome back to the Debrief, everyone. As you know, February is African American History Month, a time usually set aside to reflect more upon the contributions of African Americans to society. Some feel that that should just be part of the everyday curriculum, but that's a discussion for another time. But we welcome Dr. Zetta Elliott, who has her PhD in American Studies. You're an educator, you're an author, and you've been out front on something which you see as a lack of diversity in children's literature, which is really kind of the starting gate when you're trying to educate people. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, I think what's interesting for me is that I never really thought about diversity in literature. Even though I'm invested in diversity, I teach ethnic studies. It really wasn't until I started to try to get published myself and faced years and years and years of rejection and couldn't understand what was happening. And I would get letters from editors and they would say, "You write beautifully, but there's no market for this." And I really couldn't understand it. And so I started to do some research because I'm trained to do research.
Right.
And next thing I know, I've discovered that actually only about 5% of the books published for kids in the U.S. annually are written by people of color.
And Doctor, what's a consequence of that? You know, it's not just because, you want to write black books for black kids to read.
Not at all.
Talk about the greater
Not at all. So one of the things I can say from my own personal experience, I'm an immigrant. I grew up in Canada. I grew up reading primarily British children's literature, C.S. Lewis, right, Frances Hodgson Burnett, The Secret Garden, and I loved those books. The only books I had that served as a mirror for me were the books of Ezra Jack Keats, who's a white author who for the first time, 50 years ago, put African-American children in the center of the story. So there's a scholar named Rudine Sims Bishop, and she says books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. I think when you're a child, and you don't see a mirror when you turn on the TV, when you open a book, when you go to the movie theater, you start to feel invisible. And so when I started theorizing my own experience, I wrote an essay called Decolonizing the Imagination. And I said, as much as I loved those Narnia books, there wasn't a little brown-skinned girl with an afro running around Narnia, right? I had to dream myself into existence. And when I wrote my first picture book, I was in my senior year of high school, I wrote a story with white children. And to this day, I work in Brooklyn, I go into dozens and dozens of schools. I have black children come up to me and say, "Look at this book that I made," and it's a book full of blonde-haired, blue-eyed children. So if you don't have a mirror, it becomes difficult to see yourself in particular scenarios. And on the flip side, one of the most important things Rudine Sims Bishop said is that it's also damaging for the white children, so that if a child grows up seeing themselves over and over and over again and they never see anyone else, they almost begin to think of themselves as the center of the universe. We live in a very diverse society. If you want to learn how to communicate cross-culturally, if you want to be able to engage with people who are different from you, one of the first ways you might encounter a different person is in the pages of a book. So I think that's one of the reasons it's really important.
Tell me quickly about three things you talk about: birthday pledge, diversity gap, and second diversity gap.
Yes. So there is a huge diversity gap when we look at the number of books that are published annually in the United States.
Right.
This is our birthday party pledge.
What is that?
In response to the diversity gap, some friends and I developed the birthday party pledge. So one of the things publishers say is that we would love to publish more diverse books, but people simply don't buy them. There's no demand.
Okay.
So one way to generate demand is to ask adults to take the birthday party pledge, to promise for 1 year, every time you're bundling your child off to a birthday party, make sure one of the gifts they're giving is a multicultural book. Okay. We developed the website that has lists, about a dozen lists by genre of multicultural books, books that put children of color at the center. Okay. So there are, Ezra Jack Keats Foundation did a study, found more than 80% of parents want multicultural content and don't know where to find it. So if you're looking for multicultural content, head to thebirthdaypartypledge.com.
And that's to address diversity gap and second diversity gap, or no?
So the diversity gap, my first book, Picture Book Bird, was published by Lee and Low. They're a small multicultural press. I won the New Voices Award.
Congratulations.
They developed, and thank you, they developed an infographic that actually shows what the diversity in publishing looks like. Okay. And it's grim. You can see from this graphic here, even though people of color make up 37% of the population, and we know that that's rising, the majority of children under the age of 5 are already children of color, only 10% of the books published annually have multicultural content. Now, it's important to distinguish between diversity and equity, so we want diverse books, books that show as many different kinds of children in as many different kinds of scenarios. But what this actually shows is the number of books that have multicultural content, not the number of books written by people of color. So if we go to the next diversity gap graphic, Tina Kugler. It's a brilliant illustrator. She owned a children's bookstore. She's been a librarian. And she made a visual to go with the statistics compiled by the Cooperative Children's Book Center out of the University of Wisconsin, and annually they look at 3,600 books.
Yeah.
And what they have found, as you can see, is that 93% of those books are about one group of children. And you can see this child, she looks very uncomfortable because it's so clearly unfair. Only 3% of the books about African Americans, 1.5% about Latinos, less than 1% about Native Americans, and 2% about Asians.
You've literally given us a picture of that. You have a blog. What's it called?
Fledgling.
Fledgling? Okay, so you can read more about it. Dr. Zetta Elliott kind of painted this picture for us, like the birthday pledge. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be right back on The Debrief.